Anna's life had always revolved around her family, her work, and her steady routine. As the head of a small accounting department at a mid-sized company, she had worked tirelessly for 22 years, believing her job was secure. It had been her anchor, a source of pride, and a way to ensure her son Jake could follow his dreams. But everything changed on that fateful morning when Anna received the call that would alter her life forever. She had just finished her coffee when the ISAM phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, her manager, Dan. She thought little of it and answered, thinking it was just a routine check-in. But when Dan's voice came over the line, Anna felt an immediate sense of dread. "Anna, I'm afraid we have to let you go. The company is downsizing, and your position has been eliminated." Her heart skipped a beat, and her thoughts scrambled to make sense of the words she had just heard. "What? But I've been with you for over 2 decades. This doesn't make any sense. I've been loyal to this company. You promised we were secure." Dan sighed, the noise coming through the receiver thick with regret. "I know this is hard, but the decision has been made. HR will be in touch with you about your severance package. I'm really sorry." The words hung in the air, the finality of them sinking into Anna's bones. For a moment, the room around her seemed to fade, the familiar hum of life replaced by a deep, eerie silence. It was as though the world had shifted on its axis, and she was no longer sure where she stood. The promise of a stable future she had worked for all these years had vanished in an instant. She ended the call without another word, her hands shaking as she set the phone down. The weight of the news felt suffocating, like an invisible hand, gripping her chest. Anna had always been strong. She had to be, especially after her husband passed away a few years ago. But now, she faced a new challenge. How would she tell Jake? Jake was everything to her. Since her husband's death, he had been the one reason she kept going. Her pride, her joy, and her motivation. She had worked tirelessly to provide for him, to send him to college, and to ensure his future was bright. Anna had always been careful not to burden him with her own worries. He was focused on his studies, his plans, his dreams. She never wanted him to see the cracks in the foundation of their world. But this was different. This wasn't something she could hide. Losing her job wasn't just a temporary setback. It was a seismic shift that would affect their entire lives. Jake had just come back from college for the summer, excited to reconnect and spend time with his friends. He hadn't even been home for a full day when Anna knew she had to tell him. She could see how happy he was, how much he had grown, and the last thing she wanted was to bring him down with her problems. But there was no avoiding it. He needed to know. When she walked into the living room where Jake was sitting, his bright smile and eager energy only intensified the heavy weight in her chest. He was flipping through a magazine, casually lounging on the couch, a stark contrast to her anxiety. He looked up when she entered, sensing the shift in her energy. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" Jake asked, his voice light, not yet aware of the storm brewing in his mother's mind. "Jake, we need to talk," Anna said, her voice unsteady despite her efforts to remain calm. She sat down next to him, her heart racing in her chest. For a moment, she couldn't find the words. She had rehearsed what she would say over and over in her head, but now, in front of him, everything seemed so much harder. She looked into his eyes, searching for a glimmer of the boy who had once leaned on her for comfort and guidance, the boy who had trusted her with his dreams. "I lost my job," she said finally, the words feeling foreign as they left her lips. "They downsized. I'm not sure what comes next." Jake's face dropped, his brows furrowing as he processed her words. The room seemed to close in around them as Anna continued, explaining the shock of it all. She told him about the severance package, the uncertain future, and how she had no idea what she was going to do next. She tried to sound calm, but the raw edge of fear could not be hidden. Jake's reaction was not what Anna had expected. He didn't jump up to comfort her, didn't offer words of support or reassurance. Instead, he sat back, crossing his arms as a look of frustration crossed his face. "Mom, are you serious?" Jake finally said, his voice rising in disbelief. "You lost your job? How could this happen? You're always the one telling me to be responsible, to have a stable future, and now... this?" Anna recoiled, stung by his words, the pain deepened by the harshness of his tone. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected anger. But she realized now that Jake's disappointment mirrored her own fear. He had never been a child to show much vulnerability, but it was clear he felt the weight of their situation too. "I know this is hard, but I'll figure something out," Anna said, trying to offer him reassurance. But Jake wasn't listening. His mind was racing with his own frustrations. "I've been waiting for you to help me with my tuition payments, and now I'm supposed to cover everything myself," Jake snapped, standing up and pacing. "I can't even get the car I wanted for my graduation. This is all falling apart." Anna felt the sting of his words like a slap across her face. He was angry at her for something she couldn't control. His vision of the future had been built on the assumption that things would stay the same, that her job would always be there to help him reach his goals. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't do this right now," Jake continued, his voice laced with frustration. "I need to focus on myself." With that, he turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Anna alone with the silence. She sat there, trying to hold back tears, her heart heavy with the weight of his rejection. This wasn't the way she had imagined their relationship, but it was the reality she now faced. She knew she had to move on, but Jake's words lingered in her mind. She wasn't just grieving the loss of her job, she was grieving the loss of her son's trust, and she had no idea how to rebuild it. Days that followed Anna's conversation with Jake were filled with a profound sense of emptiness. As the sounds of his departure echoed in her mind, the house felt strangely quiet, as though it too had lost something vital. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder now, reminding her of the time that was slipping away, the moments that were passing without her son by her side. Every corner of the house felt like a reminder of the love and joy that had once filled it, now replaced by a suffocating silence. Anna wandered through the rooms, her footsteps muffled against the soft carpet. She found herself pausing in front of the family photo on the mantel, a picture of happier times. Jake was still a child in it, his face bright with innocence, his eyes full of hope. The image brought a pang of longing, and she gently traced her finger along the glass frame, remembering when he used to run to her after school, his laughter filling the house like music. Now, he was gone, and so was the laughter. The morning after Jake's departure, Anna had to face the reality of what had happened. She had tried to be strong for him, tried to shield him from the harshness of the world, but now she felt the weight of her own failure. Losing her job had been hard enough, but losing her son, even if only for the time being, felt like a blow to her very soul. She had given everything for him, her time, her love, her dreams, but it hadn't been enough. Jake was angry, confused, and hurt, and instead of turning to her for comfort, he had pushed her away. At first, Anna tried to call him, hoping that with time, his anger would subside. She left messages, texted him, and even wrote him a letter, but there was no response. She knew he was busy with his own life, his college friends, his ambitions, his future. But it hurt. She had never imagined that the day would come when she would feel so distant from him, when the connection they had shared would fray at the edges, leaving her feeling like a stranger in her own home. As the days passed, Anna found herself retreating further into herself. She would spend hours sitting in the living room, staring out the window, watching the world go by. The house felt like a prison, each room a reminder of what she had lost. Her job, her son, her sense of security, everything seemed to be slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know how to stop it. She thought about reaching out to friends, but the idea of burdening them with her grief felt unbearable. No one could truly understand what she was going through. The other mothers she knew had children who still relied on them, children who called regularly, shared their successes, and sought advice. Anna no longer had that. Jake had grown distant, and though she knew it was partly because of the stress of the situation, it still stung. She didn't know how to reach him anymore. The worst part was the guilt. Anna couldn't shake the feeling that she had somehow failed him, that if she had done things differently, if she had kept her job, if she had been able to support him financially, things wouldn't have turned out this way. She had always tried to be the best mother she could be, working hard to provide for him and ensure his future was bright. But now, as she sat in the empty house, it felt like all her efforts had been in vain. The silence in the house was deafening. She no longer heard Jake's footsteps on the stairs, no longer heard the sound of him laughing with friends, or even the small complaints he used to make about dinner or his homework. All she heard now was the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. The house, once a home, now felt like a shell, hollowed out and empty. Anna tried to fill the emptiness in small ways. She cleaned the house, rearranged the furniture, even tried to take up new hobbies, but nothing seemed to make a difference. Every attempt to distract herself only brought her back to the same place. The painful realization that her son was no longer there. She couldn't stop thinking about the argument they had had, the way Jake had yelled at her, the way he had pointed toward the door, telling her to leave. It was as though his words had become etched in her mind, a constant reminder of the chasm that had opened up between them. She missed him. She missed the way he used to sit at the dinner table, asking about her day, sharing stories from school, laughing about the silly things that had happened. She missed the way he would give her a hug before leaving for school, the way he would ask for her advice about his future, the way he relied on her for comfort when he was upset. All of that was gone now, replaced by this painful silence. But as much as she missed him, Anna knew she couldn't force him to come back. She couldn't change what had happened. All she could do was wait. Wait for him to realize that his anger, though justified, was hurting them both. Wait for him to understand. that losing her job didn't make her any less of a mother. Wait for him to see the love she still had for him, even if he couldn't feel it right now. The days blurred together as Anna continued to live in the empty house, struggling with her emotions. She cried quietly at night, sometimes in the dark, when the world was still and no one could hear her. She missed her son more than she could express, but she also knew that she had to give him space. She had to let him come to her on his own terms, and so she waited, holding on to the hope that one day things would be different, that one day Jake would come back, and they would find their way back to each other. But for now, the silence in the house was all she had. The weeks following Jake's departure were the loneliest Anna had ever experienced. She had hoped that the time apart would allow her son to cool down, to reflect on the harsh words he had said. But as each day passed, Anna felt a growing sense of isolation. The house, which had once been filled with warmth and the sounds of everyday life, now felt hollow. She could no longer hear the clatter of the dishes or the murmur of Jake's voice, echoing from the next room. Instead, there was just silence. Anna spent her days in a fog, trying to keep herself busy. She sorted through papers, cleaned the house, and even took on small projects that had been neglected for years. But nothing could erase the emptiness she felt in her chest. She missed her son more than she could put into words, and the sadness of his absence weighed heavily on her heart. Yet, even amidst the quiet sorrow, something else lingered, an unsettling feeling that there was more to her situation than just the loss of her job and her son's anger. It was one cold, overcast afternoon when Anna's life took another unexpected turn. She was at home, as usual, when there was a knock at the door. Startled by the interruption, she slowly walked to the front door, wondering who could possibly be visiting her. She hadn't had many visitors since Jake had left, and the thought of company seemed almost foreign to her now. She opened the door to find a man standing on the doorstep, dressed in a neat black suit. He was older, with graying hair, and his expression was serious but polite. His presence was commanding, yet there was a gentleness in his demeanor that put Anna at ease. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Ellison," the man said with a soft smile. "My name is Thomas Harris. I represent the law firm of Kingsley & Brooks, and I'm here to discuss a matter regarding your late husband's estate." Anna's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from anyone about her husband's estate in years. It was something she had put out of her mind after his passing. There had been so much to deal with, and the thought of revisiting it seemed too overwhelming. But now, standing on her doorstep was someone with official business, and she couldn't help but feel both curious and apprehensive. I wasn't expecting any visits," Anna stammered, trying to gather herself. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all, Mrs. Ellison," Thomas replied, his voice calm and reassuring. "I understand that this may come as a surprise, but your husband had some investments and properties that were never fully disclosed to you at the time of his passing. We need to go over some details to ensure everything is in order." Anna's mind raced as she invited him inside. She led him into the living room, offering him a seat, though she could barely process what was happening. Investments? Properties? She had no idea what he was referring to. Her husband, Peter, had always been a man of modest means. After his death, Anna had assumed that whatever they had left was enough to keep things afloat. But she never considered that there might be more to their financial situation than what she had been told. Thomas handed her a folder filled with papers, and Anna's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, She saw documents that spoke of land and business ventures, things she had never heard about. She stared at the papers, trying to make sense of them, but her mind was overwhelmed. These weren't just old bills or accounts. These were assets, real estate, stocks, and even investments in a business she didn't recognize. Your husband, Mr. Ellison, had a considerable amount of wealth tied up in these ventures, Thomas explained. He had planned to transfer them to you, but due to his sudden passing, the process was never finalized. I'm here to help you take control of these assets and ensure that they are properly managed. Anna's head was spinning. She hadn't known about any of this. Her husband had always been private about their finances, and she had trusted him to handle everything. He had always told her that everything was in order. The revelation that there was so much more to their financial situation left her stunned. How had she not known? Why hadn't Peter told her about any of this? As she sat there, processing the information, Anna realized that her life was about to change once again. This wasn't just about losing her job or her son's anger anymore. There was something much bigger at play. She had always considered herself to be a practical woman, but this revelation felt like a blow to her sense of security. The life she thought she knew, simple, quiet, and steady, was no longer what it seemed. Thomas continued to explain the details of the estate, and Anna nodded along, though her mind was still reeling. She could barely absorb everything he was saying. But one thing became clear. Peter had left her more than just a memory. He had left her a fortune she hadn't even known about. For the first time in weeks, Anna felt something stir inside her. It wasn't just fear or confusion. It was hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as bad as they seemed. But even as she tried to process the possibilities that lay ahead, another thought crossed her mind. She had a secret now. One that could change everything. And she hadn't even shared it with Jake yet. But perhaps now, with this newfound wealth and the knowledge that she was not as powerless as she had felt, she could begin to rebuild her life. Not just for herself, but for her son as well. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Anna felt like she had a future worth fighting for. The days after Anna's meeting with the lawyer felt strangely transformative. She had always believed that her world was defined by the small, simple things: a steady job, a home filled with memories, and the hope that her son, Jake, would one day find his way in the world. But the discovery of her late husband's hidden fortune had begun to change her perspective. Anna hadn't asked for the wealth, nor did she feel deserving of it, but it was hers now, something she had to learn to manage and perhaps even use to rebuild her life. She wasn't sure how it would all fit into her new reality, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. However, there was still the matter of Jake. The silence between them lingered, and as much as Anna tried to fill her time with the logistics of her new inheritance, her heart remained heavy with the absence of her son. It had been weeks since their last conversation, and each passing day seemed to deepen the chasm between them. Her attempts to reach out, text messages, calls, even a heartfelt letter, had been met with silence. He hadn't returned any of her attempts to contact him. Anna couldn't stop thinking about the last time they had spoken. Jake's words, sharp and cutting, echoed in her mind. He had been so angry, so bitter. He had accused her of not understanding his dreams, of not being able to support him in the way he thought he deserved. In that moment, Anna had felt the weight of her failures. She had failed as a mother, failed to protect him from the reality that had fallen upon them both. But now, she knew that she couldn't let that moment define their relationship forever. It wasn't too late to repair what had been broken. One evening, as Anna sat at the kitchen table, sorting through the paperwork from the lawyer, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw that it was Jake. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Could this be the call she had been waiting for? Could he finally be ready to reconnect? She hesitated for only a second before answering. Jake. Her voice was soft, tentative, almost unsure. Mom. Jake's voice came through, sounding strained and distant. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said what I did. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I realize now that I was wrong. I don't know what came over me. The words were like a balm to Anna's wounded heart, but they came with a catch. Jake wasn't yet ready to return home. He needed time. He needed space. But he was finally opening up to the idea of reconciliation. The conversation wasn't easy. There were awkward pauses, moments of silence where neither of them knew what to say. But there was also a shared understanding, a mutual recognition that they had both made mistakes. I don't know how to fix this, Mom, Jake continued. I'm struggling, and I don't want you to think that I don't care. But I need to figure things out on my own. I need you to understand. Anna nodded silently, even though Jake couldn't see her. She understood more than he realized. She had spent so many years protecting him, sheltering him from the difficulties of life, that she hadn't realized how much he had grown. He was an adult now, trying to navigate a world that was sometimes overwhelming and unpredictable. He had his own path to follow, his own mistakes to make. And though it hurt to admit, she couldn't protect him from everything. I understand, Jake, Anna said softly, her voice filled with warmth. I'm here when you're ready. I always will be. There was a long pause before Jake spoke again, his voice filled with emotion. I miss you, Mom. I don't know how to come back. But I will. I promise. Anna's heart swelled with love and relief. It wasn't the reunion she had dreamed of, but it was a step forward. A small one, but a step nonetheless. She knew that their relationship would take time to heal. The wounds from their argument, from the anger and the misunderstandings, wouldn't disappear overnight. But this was the first sign of progress, an opening, a crack in the wall that had separated them for so long. The next few days were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. Anna didn't hear from Jake immediately, but she felt a shift in the air. It was as if the distance between them had finally started to close, even if only by a fraction. She spent her time making small changes to the house, rearranging the living room, cleaning the kitchen, hoping that when Jake returned, the place would feel more like home again. In the meantime, Anna continued to manage her late husband's estate. There were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming, but she kept going. There were decisions to be made about the properties and investments, and she was determined to make sure everything was in order. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of control over her life, something she hadn't felt since before Peter's death. The breakthrough came one Saturday morning. Anna was sitting in the living room, sipping her coffee and reading through some paperwork when she heard the sound of footsteps on the front porch. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. Could it be Jake? Could he really be here? She quickly stood up, walking toward the door. When she opened it, there stood Jake, looking hesitant but hopeful. The moment their eyes met, all the pain, all the distance seemed to melt away. Without a word, Jake stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a tight embrace. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the way she had imagined their reunion, but it was real. "I'm sorry, Mom," Jake whispered as he held her. "I've been an idiot. I didn't know what I was doing." Anna hugged him back, her tears falling freely. "You don't have to apologize, Jake. We both made mistakes. But I'm so glad you're here." In that moment, Anna realized that their relationship wasn't defined by their past mistakes. It was defined by their ability to forgive, to move forward, and to heal together. She didn't need the wealth she had inherited to fix their relationship. What she needed was her son, and he was finally back. As they stood there, embracing in the doorway, Anna knew that their journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still moments of doubt and pain. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. Jake had come home, and together, they would rebuild what had been broken. It had been a few weeks since Jake had come home, and things between him and Anna had slowly started to settle. The tension that once filled the house had dissipated, replaced by a cautious optimism. They spent time together, rebuilding their connection, and although there were still moments of discomfort, they both felt a sense of relief that they were working toward healing. Anna had never imagined that their relationship would come to this, but she was determined to make it work. Anna had chosen not to tell Jake about the full extent of her late husband's fortune just yet. She knew the time would come when she'd have to share the truth, but she also knew that Jake wasn't quite ready for it. It was one thing to deal with the consequences of her lost job, and another to learn that everything had changed, both financially and emotionally. She couldn't predict how Jake would react to this revelation, and she wanted to wait until their relationship was more stable before dropping that bombshell. Jake, for his part, had been quieter than usual. Though he had returned home with a sense of purpose, there was still something weighing on him. He'd been going through the motions, working on his future plans, but Anna could sense that he was still grappling with his own inner turmoil. His return to the house had brought him closer to her, but he had yet to fully open up about the anger he had carried with him for so long. Anna knew that one day he would have to confront it, but she didn't want to force him. It wasn't until one Sunday afternoon that everything changed. Jake had come downstairs while Anna was in the kitchen preparing lunch. She heard him shuffle in, his footsteps light but uncertain. It wasn't until she turned around to find him standing in the doorway that she saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't anger, nor was it sadness. It was something more complicated, a mix of confusion, disbelief, and curiosity. "Mom, I need to ask you something," Jake said, his voice trembling slightly. Anna wiped her hands on a dish towel and set it aside. "Of course, Jake. What's on your mind?" Jake stepped further into the room, his gaze fixed on the floor as if he were trying to gather the right words. He finally looked up, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made Anna's heart race. "I found something," he began. his voice barely above a whisper. Something in Dad's things. I had no idea he had this much stuff. And I found a letter. A letter from the lawyer. What is all of this? Anna's stomach dropped. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks as the reality of the situation began to set in. She had hoped to keep the truth hidden for a little longer, but the time had come. Jake had uncovered something that she had kept hidden from him, from herself, from everyone. She had no choice now but to tell him the full story. Jake, there's something I need to tell you, Anna said, her voice soft but steady. She could see the question swirling in his eyes, the suspicion building with every passing second. She took a deep breath and sat down at the kitchen table, gesturing for Jake to join her. He sat down across from her, his body tense, waiting for her to explain. Anna hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She had been so careful about how to explain everything to him, but now there was no more time for pretense. She needed to tell him the truth, the whole truth. Your father left me more than just memories, Jake, Anna began, her voice low. When he passed, I thought we were left with nothing but the house and some savings. But there was more. Much more. Jake's eyes widened, and Anna could see the disbelief written across his face. What are you talking about, Mom? Anna reached over to the counter and pulled out the folder that had once belonged to the lawyer. She slid it across the table to him. I didn't know about this, Jake, not until recently. Your father had investments, properties, and businesses that I wasn't aware of. He kept it all a secret. And now, it's all been transferred to me. Jake picked up the folder, flipping through the papers with a mixture of confusion and awe. He seemed to be reading through everything, his expression changing as he took in the details of what he was seeing. How could Dad have kept all of this from me? Jake asked, his voice rising slightly. Why didn't you tell me? Anna sighed, the weight of the truth heavy in her chest. Your father had his reasons for keeping it secret, Jake. He wanted to protect us, but he also wanted to keep things simple. I never asked questions, and after he passed, I didn't want to dig into it. But when I lost my job, I found out there was more to our situation than I had realized. Jake's eyes narrowed as he looked at her, still processing the information. So, all this time, you've had money? We could have been okay? Anna nodded, her hands trembling, as she folded them in her lap. I didn't want you to rely on it, Jake. I didn't want you to think that you could just coast through life with money. I wanted you to learn the value of hard work, of making your own way. Jake was silent for a moment, staring down at the papers in front of him. The tension in the room was palpable. Anna could see that her son was wrestling with a mix of emotions: betrayal, anger, confusion. This revelation had shattered everything he thought he knew about their lives. I can't believe this, Jake finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. You've had all this money and you never told me. All those years I thought we were struggling together. I didn't want to burden you with it, Jake. I thought we could get by on our own, Anna explained, her voice thick with emotion. But I realize now that I kept something important from you, and for that, I'm sorry. Jake sat back, his hands resting on the table, still stunned by what he had just learned. He looked up at Anna, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and hurt. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Why didn't you trust me enough to share this? Anna's heart ached as she looked at him. She knew she had made a mistake. But in that moment, she also understood that the bond between them, while strained, was still strong. They still had time to rebuild what had been broken, to find their way back to each other, no matter how difficult the journey might be. "Jake, I made a mistake," Anna said softly. "But I'm here now. I'm ready to make things right. I don't expect this to be easy, but we'll figure it out together." Jake didn't respond right away. He just sat there, staring at the papers in front of him, his mind spinning. But Anna knew that this moment, this painful, raw conversation, was the first step toward healing. The secrets were out in the open, and now they could begin to rebuild their relationship, one step at a time. In the days that followed the revelation of the inheritance, Anna and Jake navigated a new and unexpected chapter of their relationship. The air was thick with tension, but it was the kind of tension that comes from truth being laid bare, raw, vulnerable, and undeniable. Their world had shifted, and both of them were trying to make sense of the changes that had swept through their lives like a storm. For Anna, the discovery of her late husband's fortune had been both a blessing and a curse. She had never asked for it, nor did she feel entirely comfortable with it. It felt like something that belonged to a different life, one that she wasn't sure she wanted to embrace. But Jake's discovery of the hidden wealth had forced her to confront a new reality, one that she could no longer ignore. She had hoped that her wealth would allow her to start over, to find a new sense of independence and security after losing her job. But now it felt as though everything was tangled together: her finances, her relationship with Jake, her guilt for not telling him sooner. It was overwhelming at times, but Anna had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let this fortune define her, nor would she allow it to tear her apart from her son. Jake, for his part, was still processing everything. The shock of finding out that his mother had been sitting on a fortune had rattled him more than he expected. He had always thought of their lives as modest, even a little on the edge of survival, and to realize that his mother had known about this wealth while they struggled had made him feel betrayed in some ways. But deep down, Jake knew that this wasn't the time to dwell on resentment. It was the time to move forward. The hardest part was accepting that they couldn't go back to what they once had. Their old lives, filled with routines and the simple joy of each other's company, felt distant now. The foundation of their relationship had been cracked, and no amount of money or property could repair it overnight. But Anna knew that this wasn't about what they had lost. It was about what they could still build together. One evening, Anna and Jake sat down at the kitchen table, just as they had many times before. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was a quiet understanding, a recognition that they were both trying to find their way through the debris of their past. Anna had thought about how she could make amends for the years she had kept her husband's fortune hidden, and how she could bridge the gap between them. She wasn't sure where to start, but she knew she had to be honest, open, and willing to make things right. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, Jake," Anna began, her voice gentle but steady. "I made a lot of mistakes. I should have told you sooner about the money, but I was scared. I didn't want you to think I was using it to fix everything, to buy your love or your loyalty. I wanted you to find your own way, just like I had to." Jake looked at her, his expression softening. "I get it, Mom. You didn't want me to take the easy road. You wanted me to stand on my own. I get that now." Anna smiled, relief flooding her chest. She had hoped that Jake would understand, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel real. I didn't want to keep secrets from you, Jake. I just didn't know how to handle it. And now, with everything that's happened, I feel like I've let you down. I've let us both down. Jake shook his head, his hand resting on the table between them. You haven't let me down, Mom. I've been angry and hurt, but I'm starting to see things differently now. I was angry about the money, but really, it's not about the money. It's about trust. Anna's heart swelled as she looked at her son, who was finally beginning to piece together the broken parts of their relationship. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but hearing him speak with such honesty gave her hope. They could rebuild what had been damaged. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be theirs. I know that we can't go back to how things were before, Jake continued. But we can move forward, right? We can start fresh? Anna nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. Yes, we can. Together. No more secrets. They both sat there for a long moment, a comfortable silence settling over them. The weight of everything they had been through was still there, but it was no longer oppressive. They had faced the truth, both of their past mistakes and the uncertainty of their future. And now, they were moving forward. The path ahead wasn't clear, but they would walk it side by side, rebuilding the trust and connection that had been lost. In the following weeks, Anna and Jake began to make small changes, working toward the future with renewed determination. Anna took control of the estate, using the resources left to her wisely. She decided to invest in things that mattered, starting her own small business, one that would allow her to remain independent and help her feel in control again. She didn't want the money to define her, but she also realized that it gave her a chance to create something new, something that would honor her husband's memory without overwhelming her life. Jake, too, began to find his footing. He had always been uncertain about his path in life, but now, with his mother's support and his newfound sense of clarity, he decided to pursue a career that had always interested him, working with technology and innovation. He enrolled in a new program, one that would help him develop the skills he needed to succeed. It was a step forward, a step that would lead him toward his own independence. The journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, times when old wounds were reopened, but Anna and Jake learned to face them together. They realized that the fortune wasn't the key to their happiness. It was their ability to forgive, to trust, and to move forward. The wealth they had inherited could never replace the love they shared, but it was a tool they could use to create a new future, one built on understanding and hope. In the end, Anna and Jake discovered that the greatest wealth they could possess wasn't in money or possessions, but in the strength of their bond. They had both been lost for a time, but now they were finding their way back to each other, ready to face whatever the future had in store. And with that, they embraced a new beginning, one where their relationship was no longer defined by mistakes, secrets, or regrets, but by the love and understanding they had rebuilt together. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Anna felt at peace. She had her son back, and that was worth more than anything else.